Coming up this week, Joanna Penn joins us to talk about the successful author mindset, and Hans Hirschi is here as part of the 2016 GRL Blog Tour.
Welcome to the Big Gay Fiction Podcast, the show for readers and writers of gay romance fiction. If you can read it, write it, watch it, or listen to it, these two guys are going to talk about it. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Adams and Will Knaus.
Welcome to episode 44 of Jeff and Will's Big Gay Fiction Podcast.
I'm Jeff from JeffAdamsWrites.com.
And I'm Will from WillKnaus.com.
I like that little different alliteration to get us open there.
Try something new.
There you go.
Keeping us fresh and edgy. Actually, it's like the exact opposite of fresh and edgy.
I don't know.
Anyway.
How you doing today?
I'm fine. You had a busy week. You were out of town.
I was out of town, did a whole bunch of stuff. Writing-wise, I got Love's Opening Night, Back to Dream Spinner, with the first round of edits done.
Cool.
Learned a lot of good stuff on that, so I was really pleased with how that edit turned out. Also got the first chapter of Winger Book 2 off to my writing group to look at, which is cool. While I was in LA, I did a couple things too, and I wish you would have been there. It was sad that you weren't.
Yeah, you did a lot of cool, fancy things.
Yeah, so I went to see Grey Gardens at the Amundsen Theater, and this particular production of the musical starred Betty Buckley and Rachel York, which was like, let's just swoon over those two actresses for a moment.
Yeah, they're amazing.
The production was really, really awesome. We saw it back in 2006 with Christine Ebersol on Broadway. And these two certainly live up to that production.
Cool.
Rachel York in the dual role of young Edie and then Edith in the second act was outstanding. And Betty Buckley taking over for the mother in Act 2 was also quite good. I've got a review up on jeffandwill.com for that. And if you're in the LA area, Grey Gardens continues at the Amundsen through August 14th. So there you go. I also got to go to the romance bookstore, the Ripped Bodice, on Monday night. It is so cool, people. If you live in LA, if you're in the Southern California area, you really have to go. It's a great bookstore. We'll have the link to it in the show notes. I did a quick Facebook Live while I was there. Met B, who is one of the two owners. We're going to have them on the show at some point. They were eager to come on the show, so we're going to talk to them about how they decided to start a bookstore, which, as we know, is not exactly the surest thing to start in this day and age. And how they choose to stock the store, what they want to put in the store, and what they want the store to be. It's got a nice LGBT section with both contemporary and paranormal and a new adult and young adult, and
cool.
It was really cool. I'll link up to the Facebook Live part too.
Yeah.
That's all I did in LA this week. I did go catch Star Trek Beyond just before we did our recording today. It falls in the middle of the Star Trek spectrum for me. It's not as crappy as, let's say, Nemesis or Final Frontier or the motion picture. It is not at the top of the spectrum with Wrath of Khan, Voyage Home, and First Contact, which was the Next Generation Borg movie. It's at its best when the crew is interacting with each other and solving the problem, and even their interpersonal stuff, like the stuff that's been going on with Spock and Uhura, getting to meet not Chekhov's husband, Sulu's husband, was a really nice moment. Battle sequences, you could tell it was done by somebody who directed Fast and Furious, because I think if I'd seen it in 3D, I would have been motion sick, frankly, because it was kind of dark and there's a lot going on and a lot of swooshy camera angles that were not necessary in my personal view of action film. But I mean, it was an okay story, little derivative, but the crew stuff really brought it home, and they have several nice moments in memory of Leonard Nimoy.
Cool.
And his Mr. Spock in that film.
Good.
Yeah.
Sounds nice.
Time now for the GRL Guest Author Spotlight.
We're happy to welcome Hans Hirschi to the podcast as part of the official 2016 GRL Blog Tour. Hans has been writing stories ever since he was a child. Adulthood and the demands of corporate life put an end to his fictional writing for over 20 years. A global executive in training and channel development, Hans has traveled the world and published a couple of non-fictional titles. The birth of his son and the subsequent parental leave provided him with a much-needed breathing hole and the opportunity to once again unleash his creative writing. Having little influence over his brain's creative workings, he simply indulges it and goes with the flow. However, the deep passion for a better world, for love and tolerance are a red thread throughout both his creative and nonfiction work. He lives with his husband, son, and pets on a small island off the west coast of Sweden. Thanks for being with us, Hans.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
Sounds lovely there on the west coast of Sweden.
It does, and I just noticed this morning on Facebook, we're getting a hot dog stand on the island. It's like, yay, we're joint civilization.
So let's start out with your latest, which is called Shorts, which came out in early July. Tell us what that's about.
Shorts is a collection of short stories that I've written over the past, actually more than 20 years. The oldest one is more than 20 years old. And the last one I wrote was finished probably a few weeks before it went into editing. So, yeah, but most of them were written in the last 2 years. And so it's just kind of like a collection of all the short stories I've ever written. They're all LGBTs. So for the first time, I've been able to write something that wasn't gay, and I mean gay men. So there's stories about lesbian women. There's transgender stories in there. So and that I thought that was very, very interesting to be able to branch out and do something different. So,
what was it like looking at some of those early stories as you prepared to put the collection out? Because that's a large span of writing.
It is. Well, it's only really just that one that I wrote. That was before I went into corporate. That was my Sturm time as a young 20-year-old. And I wrote the Christmas story way back then. And the reason why I wanted to include it is to show people just how much the world has changed for us since 1990 when I wrote that story and today. Because when I wrote that Christmas story, for me, the goal in life in terms of love was to find a boyfriend. And the stretch goal may have been to maybe potentially live together. But getting married, having children, that was off the radar. That was not even fathomable for any of us. And that's why I wanted to include that story, because it shows that within our lifespan, so much has changed for the better, And here I am sitting one floor above my husband and son, who are hopefully leaving us alone so I can do this interview. And it's amazing, so it's kind of like a tribute to my younger me. Whereas the other stories were written, in the past 2 to 3 years. And there's one story which is a real nightmare I had, which I had this dream after the Russians invaded the Ukraine. There are a lot of people who felt, okay, this is it. They're not going to stop. And interestingly enough, at the recent NATO summit, NATO pledged additional forces to support the Baltic countries and Poland. And so there's this real fear up here in the Northern European region that you never know with the Russians, And I had this nightmare, it was about 1.5 years ago, just shortly after the invasion to the Crimean Peninsula, that the Russians would just keep going. They would go into Finland, then come into Sweden, and with their deep love for everything gay, I figured we would have to be on the run. And so what I did is I packed up my family in the dream, and we fled the country. And in the story, which I then recount the dream, it's eerie, because you have this war breaking out in Europe, and you have these huge streams of refugees, obviously going the other way. But when you then, about 9 months after I've written the story, you watched the refugee streams coming north on TV. And it looked eerily like the mental images I had in my dream and in my story. And that's really that really still puts an extra nerve in that story. Because trying to understand what it is like to leave everything behind, in terms of pets, which was really difficult because we love our cats. But when you realize you won't be able to take them with you, when you realize, okay, this is where we have to leave the car, this is where you have to leave the pets, this is where you have to leave your suitcase. Mm-hmm. And then you end up in this refugee camp, literally with the clothes you have on your body. Now, so yeah, that was interesting. That's one of my favorite stories in that whole book, because it kind of showcases what hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have been going through coming north, but from a somewhat different perspective.
Now, you've got another book coming out in September.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the last book of the Jonathan trilogy.
Uh-huh.
Tell us a little bit about that trilogy for the folks who may not be aware of it.
Is there anybody out there who's not aware of it yet? Just teasing. Oh, God. Jonathan's Hope was the first book I published. It was the second one I wrote, but it was the first one. It beat the other book by 2 days. The Mysteries of Amazon, So it hit the markets, and it was. The thing is, I have learned so much between the first publication in 2013 and today about the whole publication industry and yada yada yada. I put those 2 first books out there without knowing anything about the publishing world, and so needless to say, I was surprised how well Jonathan's Hope was received. Now, it was a standalone story. It's about young Jonathan, 17 years old. It's late October, and his father, for reasons that you have to read about, tosses him out into a forest to die. He wants to get rid of his son. And he abandons him there. And after a few days out in the forest, Jonathan, with his last force and strength and will, he finds a cabin in the middle of nowhere where he finds Dan. Dan, who's kind of a widower. He lost his boyfriend to a hunting accident. He kind of retreated into the forest and lives by himself. He's a journalist. And those 2 men kind of find ways to find back to life together. And when I wrote the story, I wrote an epilogue to it. And the epilogue is very important to me because the epilogue kind of showcases the promise of 2 gay men starting a family. And the way it does it is the epilogue actually shows how big that family has grown, with kids and grandkids and the first great-grandchild on the way. But it's a very bittersweet ending, and I never intended for that to continue. But you know what it's like. You've written series too. So people come back and they say, well, I'm curious. What happened? What happened? What's happening next? And they've been bugging me and bugging me and bugging me for years now. And then finally, in the summer of 2015, I had a dream that Jonathan and Dan came to me in a dream. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm listening. And I decided in the fall last year, I said, okay, I'll write a sequel. One book, one sequel. And so I wrote that sequel. And I had, on the outset, I had this... I made a decision how that book would end. A very, very conscious decision that Jonathan would have to die at the end of the second book to absolutely make sure that there would never, ever, ever be a third book or any nagging from readers, because I don't do series. I am a standalone writer. I don't write series. So I just, so I thought it was an interesting experiment. Never again. And when I was done with the second book, and you actually get to this point where you have to write what you know is going to happen, with my brain, I never know how it's going to happen. I mean, it's easy to say, okay, you write a book about these 2 guys, and at the end he's going to die. But it's another thing when you're actually seeing there and you see the words appear on your screen, and you read what your brain is coming up with, and all of a sudden I'm sitting there. I'm bawling my eyes out. And I'm not exaggerating. Losing Jonathan to me was worse than losing my mother 2 years ago. It was affecting me still to this day. This is very, very difficult and very traumatic. So 4 hours later, my husband comes home. I'm still crying. And I read the scene to him. I cry some more. And I talk to my publisher and I say, what am I going to do? I can't leave it like this. And you'll have to read the book to understand why. But what happens is Jonathan gets married to a very nice younger man, and I just couldn't let that poor bastard be there at the end of the book all by himself, a widower. And so I decided to just keep writing. Next morning, I just kept on writing. And that's Jonathan's legacy. So that's the third book, which is not about the main characters of the first two novels, but Mark, the widower, and the kids and the grandkids and the great-grandchildren. I mean, there's a huge, and it's kind of interesting. I was, when I did the trailer for the book, I was asking myself some questions, and one of the questions was key scenes in that book. And in the last book, there's a scene where the entire clan goes on vacation. The kids, the grandkids, the great-grandkids, and the people they marry into and their parents. So it's like it's like this gigantic family vacation. And then I remembered that in the very first book, about a month after Jonathan and Dan meet, it's Christmas. And the difference, I mean, there's 70 years in between. We're talking about this huge family saga. There's 70 years in between, and you have a Christmas with two people, all alone in a forest cabin, by a frozen lake. And you have this huge family gathering of their offspring, their creation, 70 years down the lane in a huge Disney resort in Florida. And it's interesting. I mean, those three books are very different, but I mean, if you look at it, to me, just to be able to highlight and to tell the story of how one gay couple can create this huge, big family, this dynasty, I thought that was very interesting. So,
it's good. And it's good to see that kind of story in this day and age too.
It is, yeah, and I can't wait for people to read it. And it's very different. It's very unusual. I don't think I've ever read anything like it. I mean, still to this day and age, when a lot of the gay fiction you read ends with the characters, and I'm not talking romance, but a lot in ordinary gay fiction, still there's a lot of misery. There's still a lot of unhappiness in the end, and maybe the hope of a happy, successful relationship. But I've never read a book where there's actually, this kind of a family building going on, which is fairly common in het fiction.
Mm-hmm. What are you looking forward to in Kansas City?
Oh, a lot of things. I'm sponsoring the event very heavily this year, so we are having a fun fair on Friday afternoon, and we've got some really, really fun things scheduled. There's 10 authors of us, and we're having some kind of writing Jeopardy scheduled, with a truth or dare component attached to raise some money for the Trevor Fund. Because that's kind of my big thing is homeless kids. I really want to help homeless children. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And apart from that, just seeing friends again and getting that rush of energy from all the meetings with readers and all the crazy stuff happening. And
what's the best way for everyone to keep up with you?
Oh, God, Google me, and then you just follow the lead. I mean, you Google my name, I'm everywhere. It's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, my blog, my website.
Okay, and we'll be linking up to all that stuff in the show notes as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm easy to follow.
Excellent. Well, Hans, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
We look forward to seeing you in Kansas.
You can follow the GRL Blog Tour by going to gayromlit.com/2016 blog tour.
So right after that interview, I actually was talking to Hans, and I got added to his Daring Author Trivia for the Fun Fair. So I'll be one of the 10 authors participating in that. So if you're at GRL, come to the Fun Fair on Friday afternoon and play some trivia with us. It'll be a lot of fun. And, of course, we have to remind you that we've teamed up with the authors that we're hosting on the blog tour for a big giveaway. 7-inch Fire tablet is on the line with books from many of the authors that we're hosting on the GRL tour, plus books from myself, as well as a package from Wild City Press and the authors from them who are attending GRL. You can see the Rafflecopter on episode 44 of the show notes to enter. And the big GRL Blog Tour giveaway runs through Sunday, October 23rd. Now, your bonus word for this week, which I probably should have given in the last segment, is actually in honor of Grey Garden. So this week the word is gray. Gray.
Keep that in mind when you're entering the Rafflecopter.
That's right.
Get extra bonus entries. Good. That'll be cool.
Yeah, it's your turn to talk now, because I've jibber-jabbered
I'm going to do some talking now.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure to introduce an interview we did with someone who I think is, she's just fun and insightful and amazing, all-around, terrific person, Joanna Penn. Now, for those of you who have never heard of Joanna, Joanna is a thriller author. She writes under the name J.F. Penn, but she also runs a website and a podcast, The Creative Penn, and it is an essential resource, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
If you're an author or an independent author who self-publishes, you really need to be paying attention to her podcast, what she has to say, and some of the amazing guests she has on her show. We had the great pleasure to have her come on our show, and she's going to talk about her latest nonfiction book for authors, The Successful Author Mindset.
We're excited to welcome Joanna Penn to the podcast. Joanna is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling thriller author, as well as a writer of nonfiction books for authors. She's an independent author who has written 20 titles and sold over 450,000 books in 74 countries and 5 languages. The Creative Penn is where she offers information and inspiration on writing, self-publishing, book marketing, and how to make a living with your writing through articles, podcast episodes, videos, books, and courses. Her latest book for authors is The Successful Author Mindset, which came out in July. Joanna, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on the show, guys. I'm really pleased to be here.
So we just want to dive right into the questions because we've got so much that we want to talk to you about.
Sure. Starting
with mindset for the new mindset book, what do you find are the most common mindset issues for authors?
Yeah, well, this was so interesting because, I wanted to write the mindset book because I think we all actually suffer exactly the same stuff. Like, I think what's kind of surprising is that even the top authors in the business suffer from some of these same issues. And when I was writing the book, I thought I need to put them in the order that people suffer them. So the very first chapter of the book is about self-doubt and imposter syndrome, because I think this is the biggest issue that we all suffer. So even authors as, David Morrell, for example, who, at Thriller Fest, I write thrillers, so I tend to talk about thrillers. David Morrell's famous for Rambo, the character of Rambo, and, has been publishing for the last 50 years, really a veteran of the business, says that when he reads his words, he thinks they're crap. And, the self-doubt over whether this next book will sell, or, whether, we will actually be able to make any money from a book, or whether it's any good, or whether you can even call yourself a writer. We've just had a festival here in the UK. And I, in the Facebook groups that you hear, authors saying, "Oh, I just sat in the corner because I just felt really inadequate." And these are prize-winning authors, who most people would see on the front of a book, whose name on the front of the book and think, "Wow, they're like the top of the career." So I think that's probably the first thing, is to understand that everyone has this self-doubt, and imposter syndrome is literally just the extension of self-doubt. So it's when you are, a New York Times bestselling author and you've sold all these books and you're what most people would think of as successful, you're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, they think I'm an author, but what if this next book is a flop? And so that's probably the biggest issue, I think. And every author will suffer self-doubt at some point. It never goes away. It just changes as part of the process.
Mm-hmm. I liked how you put the book together, because it really flowed, I thought, from kind of the basic issues on, through to like when you're a career author and the issues that you battle there.
It was, I think when I was doing it, and it was a very difficult book to write, because obviously it's quite personal and I put my own diary entries in it and that type of thing. But what's been interesting is people have said, it's like you read my mind. And I was very scared. I had a lot of self-doubt about putting this book out there because I thought, oh no, people are going to read it and then I am an imposter and I do feel all these things. But actually, when you're honest about how you feel, that's when people resonate with you. And I'd urge people listening, if you are writing, then just really put yourself onto the page, and that is what will resonate with people, is being real and kind of owning up to who you are. Even if you're writing under a pen name, you're still being real in an emotional sense, and that is what resonates with people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are the mindset issues have you found that are more difficult to battle?
Personally, I guess let's say another common fear, and then I'll get on to personally, but a common fear is this fear of rejection and fear of criticism. And this holds a lot of people back, however they publish. Obviously, fear of rejection, you get that if you submit to agents, submit to publishers, but also now we get it as indie authors from reviews. So that, fear of rejection from new readers, so the fear of the one-star review, fear of rejection from our peers if we write something that is difficult in some way, or one of the reasons people use pseudonyms in the romance space is because it's not acceptable in many places to write some of the stuff that people write. So this fear of rejection, criticism, fear of failure, a lot of this stuff is bound up in the training we've had over many years and the schooling and our families and these big issues that we just can't hope to overcome. We just have to face them. And for me, this sort of manifested in self-censorship. So I'm a very happy, smiley, jolly person, and my nonfiction is very upbeat, very self-help, but I write darker fiction. So, and my favorite author would be Stephen King. And, I'm moving, I'm in the action, adventure, thriller genre, but some of my writing is towards the darker end. So the London Psychic series is quite dark, and I write some violence. And this type of stuff is, even my mum said, why can't you write something nice, and when people say, like, why can't you write something that's more like Hilary Mantel was the classic quote, who wrote Wolf Hall, this historical, Booker Prize winning literary fiction that took 10 years to write. And this, it's still grates on me, that kind of, why can't you write something nice? So I self-censored until my fifth book. And then in my fifth book, which was Desecration, and you can tell a lot from the title, I just let it all, hang out. And I think this is part of that emotional journey that you have to go on, and finding your voice is a lot about sort of getting over that fear of judgment, fear of failure, and letting it be out there. So those are kind of, I guess, some of the more deeper issues. And certainly my own issue is always fighting self-censorship.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we were setting up this interview, we sent you a blog post from an author who's a friend of ours. And we've seen a number of posts like it lately from authors who I think are going through several things. They're comparing to others. They're not quite satisfied with where their career is and issues like that. What do you recommend to those authors to kind of help get them into a better mindset, I guess, is just the simple way to put it?
Yeah. So, on that comparisonitis thing, as I call it, again, that's very common. I suffer from it too. But I did, last weekend, I actually walked 100 kilometers. I did this 100-kilometer race to the Stones. And that taught me a lot about comparisonitis, right? Because, so it was 50K, and then I slept, and then I did 50K. And it took me around 26 hours to walk the 100K. The winner took 8 hours. And I came in the very last quartile of people on the end of Sunday, but a whole load of people never even finished. And when I've been thinking about this a lot, I've been thinking this is exactly like the writer's journey and this comparisonitis thing. I've been training for 6 months, right? And there's a lot of people listening who be like, I can't do 100K. And it's like, okay, sure, because you haven't done the training, but there's no way I could have done it in 8 hours. So how can I compare myself to the person who is an ultra marathon runner? And how can the person who hasn't done any training compare themselves to me? So this is the same with our writing journey, but we seem to think that writing, everyone should be on the same level. So the comparisonitis for me is, okay, how can I compare myself with Stephen King? I can't. He is like the ultra marathon runner. He's been writing training for the last 40 odd years since, he started writing like age 7 or something ridiculous. And in the same way, we have to think of our writing journey, why are you doing this? To me, this is a lifelong journey. It's, you can learn new stuff as a writer until you die. And so if you're going to be writing until you die, how can you be at the top of the game right now? I'm 41. I hope I'm not quite middle-aged yet. I'd like to get to 90, a fit 90-year-old. So I have a long way to go. So that's why I think the very first thing is we need to stop comparing ourselves to other writers. You don't know how long they've been writing, how many words they've written, how many different genres they've published in, how many names they've used. You just can't compare apples with apples in this writing space. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when I looked at that blog post, obviously there's the standard issues of self-doubt, fear of failure, but also not making enough money from the books. And, one with love, saying with love, you have to look after your psyche and your self-doubt, be nice to yourself. And then you have to kick yourself up the ass and say, seriously, no one owes you a living. Certainly not from writing, certainly not from your art. How many artists actually make a living from their art? The reality is that most people have other jobs. Now, for me, my other jobs, I have 12 fiction books now, and I like a good living. I wouldn't say that those 12 books make me a full-time living still, but I have 8 non-fiction books. I do courses, I do speaking, I do other things that make me income that could be equated to like day job income. So this is what I would say to people. It's like, why are you writing? If you went into this to make as much money as a day job, then it takes a while. As any job, you have to become a better writer and get a backlist. So basically be nice on one hand and be gentle with yourself. And on the other hand, go, seriously? Just like do the work and put in the time, create the backlist, and also consider writing in other genres. As we briefly discussed before the show, you don't have to just write in games. You could write straight romance, or you could write other genres, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever else you want to write, non-fiction. There's lots of things that we can write and we can use our writing skills to do. So I hope that's not too hardcore.
Well, I think you make a good point about the other genres. We talked a little bit before we started about, Data Guy's review of the romance genre and how gay romance sits squarely in the middle of the high and the low. And you also make a good point about nonfiction, because you do make a good chunk of your income, as we know, because you put your numbers out there from your nonfiction books.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually find I finished my last novel, I think it was March or something. We're in July and I wrote a non-fiction. And I'm now starting to work on the next fiction and the next non-fiction. Writing in different genres can be like a palate cleanser and can actually help you renew that energy. Because let's face it, if you do go all out on a novel, which you should, never save anything for the next book, because, the creative well will refill itself. But when you empty yourself into a book, and I also put this in the mindset book, the feeling of being empty at the end of writing a book is completely normal. And if you don't feel empty, then you haven't given enough. But the thing is, then you need time to fill up that creative well again, and that takes time. Whereas actually writing nonfiction is much easier than writing fiction, because it's like you pick a topic and then you research the topic and then you write chapters on the topic, whereas a novel is far more complex. And I think one of the issues right now in the indie author space, especially romance, is this sort of, you must publish fast, you must publish often, and people are burning out, and that's an issue. So to stop burnout, you have to do something else. So why not write a nonfiction, or why not write something completely different, or do some freelance writing, do some paid blog posts, do some journalism, do something else if you want to earn with your writing that isn't just the one genre that you've been writing in.
Mm-hmm. You use the word palate cleanser, writing your nonfiction books between the fiction, the thrillers that you write. For those who are listening, you've written some really terrific stuff about book marketing, about the business of being an author. Both those books we both love to death. Do you think those nonfiction titles are a way not only to cleanse your palate, but also to examine your own mindset, the way you approach your author business?
Yeah, and like many people, I think many writers, I don't really know what I think until I write a book on it. So, so when I wrote, Business for Authors: How to Be an Author Entrepreneur, I was actually trying to make sure my own business was robust enough. And as I did, I basically there's a really good book called The Personal MBA. I think it's Josh Kaufman. Anyway, so I got that book and I was like, okay, I need to go through this book and make sure my business stands up to the rigor of any other business. And in using that as a starting point, that's how I ended up writing Business for Authors, which then also helps other authors become author entrepreneurs. So you're exactly right. I want to, write the books that enable me to learn about a topic. So when I first wrote How to Market a Book, the first edition, and I'm about to start on the third edition, but that first edition, I was learning book marketing at the time. And again, I wanted to codify what I thought in my head, and then it would help other people. And it's funny because I'm going to write a book on how to write a novel, and I think I'm ready for that now because I've written 12, and I feel like, okay, I think I need to work out how I write a novel and maybe improve the process, so I will do that. But I've got other ideas, like, for example, and this is what's great about writing, of course you always get more ideas. We just talked about self-censorship, and I did a lot of psychology earlier in my career, and so I want to write about the Jungian Carl Jung's shadow side, and the importance of the dark side of our personalities and how you can use that. And I'm like, okay, well, I have to write a book on the shadow. That at some point I will do that. So that goes into the mix as something else I want to really research and understand. So if people are thinking, oh, maybe I could write nonfiction, think about any topic that you're interested in, that you're curious about, or maybe you're already an almost expert in it. And that could be anything, like I have a friend who does a lot of knitting. Knitting is a really big sort of genre in fiction and nonfiction. My husband's into jujitsu. You can do stuff on anything you like. It doesn't have to be about writing. That just happens to be my obsession, but I'm definitely looking to expand into other topics over time.
I wanted to ask about your love of Steven Pressfield. We are fans of your show, The Creative Pen, and you've spoken about Steven Pressfield several times. We have read his books. Anyone listening who hasn't read, The War of Art, definitely should, writers or creatives in general. It's an amazing book. What sort of struck me is Pressfield takes a sort of, he presents his subject in little kind of like bite-sized nuggets. There are little golden pieces of information that you can take away. And I felt that you present your book in sort of a similar manner. You tackle different problems, different mindset issues that authors have in a similar way. Did he influence the way you sort of attacked the subject and laid out the book?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, of course, I hero worship Steven Pressfield, and when I interviewed him on my podcast, I was like a ridiculous fangirl, and I was kind of all giggly and ridiculous. But I think he quite liked that. But yes, I think what's happened also in the nonfiction space, and of course, The War of Art is a very slim book. Yeah. Turning Pro, which is the kind of the one that goes a bit further, which I still reread several times a year because it's so hardcore. Is very slim as well. Seth Godin is another one who's writing small nonfiction. I think what's happened is it used to be that, but because publishers ordered books to fit on shelves and had to have really big, spines, that what nonfiction books used to be much longer. Mm-hmm. And now it's like it's acceptable to write a short nonfiction book and price it accordingly. So, the mindset book is like I guess a novella length in terms of fiction, and you would say also Steven Pressfield's nonfiction is novella length, even though he writes like massive fiction. So yes, definitely, I think I've modelled his approach to the chapters, but it's also what I like to read. What I find with a lot of nonfiction that's traditionally published is it's so overly packed with kind of unnecessary material, and you can tell
there's fluff.
There's fluff in, like, they restate the same thing over and over again in a different way, and it's just like, and you can tell with how many things are highlighted. Whereas, you know, a Stephen Pressfield book, and I hope with my books at some point, every single paragraph should have something highlighted
exactly. Yes.
Because it's a different experience to fiction. Like fiction, you shouldn't, like, if you find fiction books that have been highlighted, they're usually literary fiction, or maybe there's a couple of highlights in our novels, but usually people want to sink in and just relax. Whereas I feel non-fiction should earn its money by giving a lot of value in a small amount of space.
Well, speaking of giving value, this new book, the Mindset book, you have a couple of different editions. You have the ebook edition, of course, the print edition, and this time you've also done a workbook. And I was curious, what extra work did you put into the? Before we came on this interview, I was actually in the other room and I was on Amazon looking at the workbook, and I was curious as to first of all why you decided to do a workbook, and what's different about the workbook as compared to the text of the regular book.
Yeah, so I've also done an audiobook, which I've self-narrated as well. So basically, the idea in general is to turn our books into multiple streams of income. So the workbook idea, and I think I did one because I did an adult colouring book with my dad back in January, the English Country House and Garden fine art colouring book. And we did a notebook version of that, which is essentially exactly the same images, but with notebook pages in between. And the thing is, it costs, I use a outsourced designer, and it would cost me around $60 to get a workbook version of a book made, which is nothing, right? So why not create a version of a book that is a self-help book with questions into a notebook? So literally all I did was, and the workbook is exactly the same in terms of the text, but it has extra pages in where you can actually write the answers, into the book if you want to. And it's a different size, so it's a 6x9 instead of a 5x8. And so some people just want to have the book, and some people like to write in it. But because it cost me barely anything to get an extra version, I just thought, well, why not? And some people really like that. So I've had people send me pictures of them writing in things. So I'm definitely going to, in the future, if it's appropriate. So like, I think with How to Market a Book, for example, I wouldn't do a workbook version of that. But How to Make a Living with Your Writing, for example, that might lend itself to doing a workbook version. So that's kind of why I did it. And I think if you're writing anything where you're asking questions of the audience, of the reader, you could do that. I mean, why not?
How do you find that your mindset has evolved over your career, and along with how you manage the issues when you have them?
Yeah, so I think the biggest change is the reality, or the realizing that other people feel exactly the same. And I don't think things have changed, as in I still have self-doubt. I still have this empty feeling when I finish a book. This kind of feeling that, oh no, I'm never ever going to write a book again. I feel so empty. What's going to happen now? I now recognize that is just part of the process. I recognize that when I struggle with a full-length book, I'm not a detailed outliner. So around 25 to 35,000 words, I will suffer a problem, and then I will have to do some replotting. But now I understand that's part of the process. So I think the main thing is that when I started writing, which is actually now 10 years ago, 10 years I started writing my first nonfiction book, I now understand my own psychological process, and I keep journals and I write things down. But it's like, okay, so I'm empty. I now need to start filling my creative well again. for example. So at the moment, I'm starting to do research for End of Days, which is my next Arcane thriller. And, I did a crazy thing. I came up with the title, put it on pre-order, and then went, oh dear, I've just called a book End of Days, which kind of makes it, there's going to be some expectation around what that book's going to have in it. But also you need to do something original. So I have had a little bit of concern about that. But I understand that when I do research, stuff will emerge from the world, and as ever it has, synchronicity, serendipity, whatever you want to call it, this stuff will appear in the world when you start researching. So I think that's the biggest shift for me, is this realization of the creative process, and also I guess just letting go and relaxing a bit more as well. I think when you're writing that first book, it's like everything is bound up in this one book. It's like the most important thing ever. And then when you put the book out there, you realize that it's just the beginning of something else. And in fact, I have this chapter on anticlimax and creative dissatisfaction, which I wondered whether to put in there. And I've actually said on it, don't read this if you're writing your first novel, because
Exactly, yeah.
I don't think people want to know that. And they actually think that it is the pinnacle. Publishing that first book is the pinnacle. Well, it's not. It's like, actually, the writing is the point. And yeah, so I think, those are some of the things.
You mentioned the journals. What was it like going back through all that? Because I really felt like you laid yourself bare in some of those chapters, and it's like, wow, I mean, that's brave what you just put on the page there.
Oh, and I'm glad you thought it was brave, because I was really worried about putting my journal stuff on there because of exactly that reason. It was like, what if people read it and they don't feel the same way? I mean, that would have been pretty awful. People, I was, in a way, I was expecting a whole load of email that said, I never feel like that, but that didn't happen, thankfully. So what I did is I actually went through, like the last 10 years pretty much of my journals, and, typed out parts of it. And I think what's interesting with writing, I don't know if you guys find this, but I find when I write stuff down, it's removed from my head. So some of these, like I really believe that horror writers are the most psychologically healthy people out there, because they take all of their dark stuff and they put it on the page, and then they're just super nice people. They're not concerning at all. It's people who like romance or happy, nice, the ones you've got to worry about.
They're the crazy ones. Yes,
they
are.
But those of us who write violence, we're just super nice. But I think what some of those quotes, I'm like, oh, that is hardcore, but I don't feel like that anymore. But I did at the time. So that's why I put it in there, because over time we learn and we change. But it's like, I also have journals from when I went through a divorce back in, goodness, a while ago now, because I'm in a happy second marriage. But when I look at the journals of my divorce, there's like 3 of them over a 4-month period. I don't even recognize that woman. Like the things that I was writing down, I don't recognize that person anymore. And it's the same with some of this stuff around creativity and mindset. If you write it down, you can move on. But if you don't, it will stick in your head. So I think that's part of the magic of being a writer is, journaling or writing books. You can actually remove it from your head and get on with your life.
Mm-hmm. And I would assume this, and you've been in this now for 10 years, that perhaps the mindset for you has changed a little bit. So you're thinking more things that are like in the 3rd section of the book for the career writers as well. I mean, do you find that to be true now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm there's 2 things I'm pretty obsessed with that I go on and on and on about, and you guys, know my writing and the podcast and stuff. One is this long-term thinking. I think too many writers get obsessed about like today's sales, tomorrow's sales, this month's launch, whatever. Whereas actually, this is a long-term journey, and also that you die at some point, and so why waste any time at all writing a book you're not interested in? This is why I know some people write like for day job money, but I consider that to be like freelance writing. If you're writing for day job money, that's all it is. But if you are writing as, your creative muse, I guess, inspires you, then work on things that you really care about, because we don't have much time on this earth. So I think that's really important. So that's one of my obsessions, is this long-term thinking. And the second one is the multiple streams of income idea, as we just talked about, with the mindset book. I put it out on the first day with those 4 different formats and the audiobook that I narrated myself. And that to me is something that and the author you mentioned earlier, who's struggling with some money side of being a writer, this is also part of the thing. So you publish on multiple platforms, although I know in romance, KDP Select is, pretty powerful. I'm thinking long term, if you look at what's happening in Africa right now and Asia, I want to be selling to those people. And that's not KDP Select. I think now only 45% of my income comes from the US. So 55% is now outside the US. That's a big shift in the last couple of years in terms of income. It used to be, for many people, it will be 100% US and 100% ebook and 100% Amazon. That's a dangerous place to be. So thinking multiple streams of income, multiple platforms, multiple formats, multiple books, multiple series, thinking about it that way, what you get is, and what I've seen true for me as an author entrepreneur, is every year my income expands, not quite exponentially, but it is impacted by the choices of going wide in many senses of the word. So I think those are, that fits into taking control of your writing career. And it felt like the author that you mentioned before felt control. Like, I can't seem to create the thing I want to create. And so for me, it's about, if you take control of your writing career and you make decisions for the longer term, not just for next month, for example, then you might make different decisions around building the life that you want. And also, to be fair, I spent 13 years doing a job I hated, and I refuse to do that now. So I kind of make decisions around freedom. Freedom's a big thing for me. For example, I don't want to be a publishing company for anyone else. This is a big thing. I get people asking me a lot, and a lot of indie authors are setting up publishing companies, which is fine, but authors are needy. And I don't want to run a publishing company, because I would spend a lot more time doing that. So I choose to do education and inspiration and sell courses, not consulting time, that type of thing. So make these choices around the lifestyle you want, the future you want, and think long term.
Mm-hmm. And it's a topic for a whole other show, but I just want to let the authors know that you mentioned the audio for the mindset book, and you've done, I at least know you did audio for Business for Authors, that you yourself recorded and did not go through ACX for it, but you have it available on your website, and authors who don't want to or can't take the leap to do an ACX recording can look at that as something they could have on their own website.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously you need traffic to a website in order to sell from your website, and I wouldn't do it with fiction. Although I say that, do you guys know Scott Sigler? No,
I know the name.
Yeah, know of him. Yeah, he's like the most famous, I think, podcasting author. He's been doing his own fiction audio for must be nearly 10 years now. So he will write a chapter and he will record it, and he's a big New York Times published author, traditionally published, but in all his contracts he says, I will continue to put out free audio on my website, and he's been doing it for years, and people love him, and he reads he'll kind of read like a try and be a woman, and it will be not great, but he does it very well. So I have considered, what if I started reading my own fiction as well as non-fiction, because I think, again, it's very empowering and you take control. So I've recorded Author Mindset, I sell it from my website, I can change the price, and this is the big issue with ACX, right? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but my income from ACX has dropped in the last year as people have signed up for their subscription service, and we get paid much less money per recording. So this is the issue with audio. There was this small period where it just went nuts and was great, and now it seems to have dropped off a bit. So that's why I decided to sell direct, just to see how it goes. However, I would say that we're not at a point where audio, MP3 I mean, podcasts are great because they can appear on your phone, right? But at the moment, if someone buys an audiobook direct, it doesn't appear on their phone. So I talked to the Book Funnel, Damon from Book Funnel, if they could do something with audiobook, that it would appear on their device, that would change the game around selling audio direct.
Yeah.
But at the moment, people have to pay for the MP3, download it, put it onto their device, sync it up.
Yeah, the whole sideload thing.
Yeah, the side-loading thing. Whereas what's happened with podcasting, podcasting really, really took off when, everyone used a smartphone and could subscribe and it just appears.
Mm-hmm. So that was just the first part of our interview with Joanna. Next week, we're going to continue our conversation. We're going to talk a little bit more about how authors can be successful in their creative pursuits as well as in their marketing, in the marketing side of being an author.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the whole business of being an author.
Yes, yeah.
And don't be scared by that, because it's not as daunting as it sounds.
I think it's a really terrific interview, a valuable interview for our authors who are listening, and hopefully for some of the readers who are listening. You're going to get a little bit of a inside peek at what authors, some of the crazy stuff they go through in order to create the amazing books that we all love to read.
Yeah, and I think also what we just heard about the mindset point of view things too can be adapted to almost anybody's career, anybody's pursuits, creative or otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
exactly.
Hopefully y'all are enjoying Joanna as much as we are by getting to bring her to you. So besides Joanna coming back next week for part 2, we also have Lex Chase with us for the 2016 GRL Blog Tour. Mm-hmm. So we'll see all of you back here next week.
See you guys.
Thank you for listening to Jeff and Will's Big Gay Fiction Podcast. New episodes are available every Monday at iTunes and other major podcast outlets. While there, subscribe to the show and please consider leaving a review. For detailed show notes, links, and to sign up for the monthly newsletter, visit biggayfictionpodcast.com.